Good evening and welcome to the April edition of the Poetry Playhouse Open Mic Series. It's my extreme pleasure tonight to host Art Goodtimes, who I call the Bard of Telluride. And it was, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe, that Art was down here and read for us at Jules Poetry Playhouse when we were located in Albuquerque. Now we're up in Placitas. So it's very overdue for a visit, even if it's a Zoom visit. And we are hoping now that things are lightening up a bit and Art's feeling stronger, he might be coming down to do a reading here in person one of these months. So we'll keep you tuned about that. Art Goodtimes grew up in San Francisco before moving to Colorado. He served for 20 years on the San Miguel County Board of Commissioners as Colorado's only Green Party endorsed official. He's been a member of dozens of boards, commissions, and committees all around the country. He connected with the Telluride Mushroom Festival in various capacities for over 30 years and was its poet laureate. He's also an executive board member and former president of the Telluride Institute. Art has worked as a preschool teacher and director, freelance writer, journalist, editor, columnist, poetry editor for Twin Peaks, for the Earth First Journal, the journal Wild Earth, and the Mountain Gazette, Fungi Magazine, and so forth. He also founded Talking Gourds, an ever-changing poetry feast in the Gourds circle tradition. He's performed all around the country at festivals, bookstores, schools, libraries, and so forth. He was named the first Western Slope Poet Laureate in 2010. Art's books, and this is only a partial list, include Slow Rising Smoke, Blackberry Books, 1981, As If the World Really Mattered, La Alameda Press, Albuquerque, 2007, Looking South to Lone Cone, The Cloud Acre Poems, 2013, Poetry Flash, San Francisco. He was co-editor of an anthology of mushroom wedding poems in 2016. Turnstar Press of Telluride brought out a limited edition chapbook in 29 that he co-authored called Telluride Valley Floor. And his latest book, as far as I know, is Dancing on Edge, the McRed-Eye Poems from Lithic Press 2019. So that's a long list, and it's only a small part of his curriculum vitae. So please help me welcome Art Goodtimes.
Hey, thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be with you, Zooming with so many of people who I know or have friends with. Gail was just saying she's got a May 10th reading coming up. Yeah. Let's start with a poem called Natural Grocers. It's the Whole Foods of Colorado anyway. Excuse me, said the clerk to the customer. I sending the customer to the clerk. Where can I find the free-range chicken? In meats, said the clerk to the customer. Right next to the free-range squid. I was gonna, I love Natural Grocers, but they ran a nice local group out of business, so I was a little upset with them when they came to Colorado, at least this part of Colorado. Western Slope, we kind of consider ourselves a separate nation from Colorado, although we're pretty happy with our government compared to many state governments. So, but nevertheless, even though we have a lot of crazy people like myself and Bobert, and we have all kinds of folks on the Western Slope. Some of them are our friends, and some of them are frenemies, and some of them are just people crazy. It's spring, so I'm going to start, even though it's snowing where I am right now, I'm going to start with a poem from As If the World Really Mattered that J.B. Bryan and Sorrelda put out with that Alameda Press in Albuquerque. And they actually have a little tea house up there at Placitas, which is so beautiful. If you've ever had a tea ceremony with JB, he's an amazing fellow. This poem is called Wildflowers, and it's from my friend Marcia. Fireweed, tansy, saladago odora, beside the bituminous asphalt's edge, where the wild things grow lush, a hand searches for hues. Is it necessary to know the name of things, to set stems in water, to make colors leap like salmon from a fountain of white porcelain? The map followers whiz by on their wheels, whiz by on their wheels. They have no time for tints and shades. Enough the pleasant blur of forms, Dutch barn, billboard, deer in the pines. Rare to find some seeker of line who interrupts the smooth cut of the roadway. A silhouette against the horizon, stopped on the shoulder for a look at the moon. Close to the earth, plants take on their own place, breathe, take on life. The foot steps gently because its weight crushes, seals the ground with the imprint of death. To separate from the main stream, to pull over on a side road, lingering beside clear spring pools that are the eyes of a lover, of a friend seen once again. Then, how easy it is to let go the engines idling in the heart, even for just a few moments, to have no thought other than wildflowers. The couple, out jogging along the gravel road, stop beside a barb-studded bush and pick wild raspberries. Red taste, sweet on the breath, leads them astray. Must tempt us into fields of summer grass where names like rattlers shed their skins. Here's one. Some of you may know I studied to be a Roman Catholic priest for 7 years. I had a training, and in those days it was a minor seminary for 6 years and then a major for 6 more. I only did half of one. When I got to some of the wearing a little white collar and a black robe wasn't my scene. And luckily these days, all my friends who went on to do that, most of them for really good purpose, are now in this sort of discredited profession where people look at them askance now. It's very strange. Anyway, this is called Altar Boys. Once, there may have been a reason to genuflect with Aquinas, to join all the hymns in the catacombs beneath the Vatican's Holy Roman Mother Church. But Paul of Tarsus and Augustine of Hippo had right wrong. So we threw our Greek books out the seminary windows. We dropped out of the 13th century. We jumped aboard the 60s acid test school bus. Paralyzed by the crisp bite of Psilocybe's apple and its entheogenic blanching of belief, we were enamored with the now. Spending Sundays hunting and gathering shrooms on Mount Tam at Land's End, kneeling before the altar of funga, alert to its sudden apparitions, learning to snap, pluck, pack, and play. The Pacific winds in the Douglas fir are introit. The Grateful Dead are Kyrie, De Omnipotente. Having donned a surplus of sentient mycelia, what once we served no longer served us. Ordained now, as we are, acolytes of poetry, high priests of mushrooms. Yeah, I got a phone call when I first came to Telluride years and years ago. I got appointed pretty early went from a laborer flying off of the handles of wheelbarrows to the director of the arts council in this little mountain town. So suddenly I was connected to the arts, and there was a call saying, we want to do a mushroom conference. Do you know anybody who can help us? Well, I'd been a member of the Mycological Society in San Francisco, so I was very excited. And that was 43 years ago, and I've been poet in residence ever since. So come join us. We parade down Main Street and Telluride dressed up like mushrooms. Very, very fun place. Here, let me read a story. I went up since I didn't die. I went to a dyeing workshop up in Washington State. It was mushroom dyeing, so it wasn't exactly the same, but and this poem came out of an experience there. It's called Chocola. Used to the dry cold of Colorado, Captain Barefoot long prided himself in his fiery Italian blood, hands warmer than all his women friends, until he swung into Port Townsend's rain shadow for a dyeing symposium and met her, Patrice. Neither of us star dyers, but both bright cotton, bathed in curiosity, alive to the sporulating secrets of the fungal multiverse. Thrown together in the backseat of a designated foray into a normally drenched, now drought-numb Northwest forest, he felt the cold, the wet cold of the coast seeping like dye into his core. And she felt the blue chill in his hands and offered to warm them in hers. Him refusing politely at first out of learned decorum, moral strictures, until finally surrendering to the clasp of her kindness, realizing, as he has late in life, not to checkmate himself, cuff his bliss to mordants. No, let the natural shine, let the heart accept what's freely given, unattached, perhaps, but entangling. Chocola! The kids love to shout, slapping hands after class at the granddaughter's Spanish immersion kindergarten in San Francisco, bouncing around the playgrounds in the exuberance of Epiphany. Chocola! High five! So I did write one just today, and I got invited to a party for my friend Candy DeGraw, who's in hospice with terminal illness, and she's a character, a trickster, a wonderful woman, and Mormon previously, no longer anymore. I think now she's a part of the Subgenius Church. I don't know, whatever. She's going to have her own party, a heaven or hell party. And she says she wants to put the fun back in funeral. So I had to write her a poem since the party's coming up ahead here. It's called Raising Heaven or Hell. Hanging clothes on the farmhouse T-Bar's scenic clothesline, looking out on the Sneffel Range, the Wilsons, Lone Cone. Watching a dusk volcano of alpengluen erupt into a crystal chandelier of light. This quandary arises. Is today a day to praise the firings, space failures, arming of foreign armies, advertising and propaganda masquerading as media, the vaccination frenzies, my country's fetish allegiance to guns, lies in the case of war, or do I rail against the melting ice sheets, the drowned polar bears, AI, APCA, artificial intelligence's grand master champion chatbots, or sex bots like Amber or Harmony, self-learning, artificially intelligent whore dolls, robot pet slave fuck buckets, as Ariel would say, on the way as we are to Lovelock's Novacine, the maybe coming age of mix and match cyber neurotic Borg intelligence? Or maybe I should be asking, how many Kennedys does it take to break the assassination chains in this country? Or maybe there's nothing to ask. Maybe looking's enough out here in rural Colorado, writes Mesa, on a wrong turn to Montrose, Walmart, Home Depot, where the new West still mingles with the old West. Typical spring weather today: rain, sleet, a peak of sun, snow flurries, blizzard, a storm blowing in from Utah, releasing the clothespins from the clothesline. Time to take down the wash, to bring what's wet under roof. Praise, rail, raise whatever hell that matters, says Captain B. Find whatever heaven you can. Thank you. Well, let's see. We have time for one more. Yeah, it should be about now. This is a poem that I just got published. Jason, the Salzman family were the people that founded the Telluride Mushroom Festival. Manny Salzman, Dr. Emmanuel Salzman, was a radiologist at Beth Israel Hospital in Denver. And he felt very strongly, along with Paul Stamets, Gary Linkoff, and Andy Wild, and Dr. Andrew Weil, that mushrooms were medicine and that we should be treating them as medicine. And it's only 40-some years later that we finally get around to understanding what he was talking about. His son runs a newspaper online for Denver called the Colorado Times Recorder. And so they just published this poem. It's called Another Day. Gratitude for the plain, the unwrapped, the gift that gives itself away, the desert varnish that took centuries to stain stone, the path that leads nowhere but follows the hints of tracks, wild critters. Gratitude for snowshoeing in spring storms, the wind's breath, glint of first sun's 1,000 crystal gems on the snow's alabaster skin. Gratitude for the overcrowded boats that don't sink. Peaceful demonstrators not shot in the back. Neighbors' homes unburned. Bodies not lying in the street. Gratitude for politicians who tell the truth. Reporters who uncover lies. News that feeds our hearts, informs, and educates our minds. Gratitude for the children who don't go missing, who don't get shot. For coaches who inspire, who don't abuse the trust of innocence. Gratitude for the churn of every day, the surprise of the sudden, unexpected changes, engines turning over, shovels turning under, sweet cream turning into butter. Gratitude for the rumpled, the unironed, the beds unmade, the geography of wrinkles on an elder's face, their tattoos of place. Gratitude for the simple, the unheralded, for thankless random acts of kindness, unnoticed, unreported, for dreams that wake us into the priceless windfall of this another day. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. And we have time for one more if you want to do another.
Yeah, I was just thinking that if you'd like to do one more, do you want to do one more poem?
Sure.
One more.
Let me do one. There was a conference that we used to do in Salida. In 1989, we started talking gourds. We started doing with Dolores LaChapelle, who was my teacher, and we started going up into the mountains, Windy Point, and a couple different places, ranch, and having outdoor poetry events. We had it for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and out of that, Jude, Janet, and Lori, they founded a Salida Poetry Festival, and that went on for 6-7 years. Now we have a Crestone Poetry Festival, which has been going on. So Western Colorado has been very lucky to have a bunch of these events. So here's Sparrows. And it was actually an acronym. I don't know, some poets at, I forget what it was. Anyway, Sparrows. In Salida, a gathering of poets is no murder of crows, no carrion chatter, no hunt, peck, and poke in disembodied quibbles, but lots of singing, call and response, the dipping of wings, trading books like feathers, deep talking on stage, in bars, in walks along the Arkansas. No flashy Audubon awards, no ornithological frippery, just a platform feeder for the soul and poetry's lyric valuables.
That's singing. Wow. Bravo.
Thank you, Art. I'm going to add John up here as well.
Yeah, well, that was just marvelous. So yeah, the gratitude for the churn of every day. Yeah, poetry's. What was the last line? Poetry's valuable. Yeah.
This is the today.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I just thought we would chat for a few minutes before we're getting to the open mic. And you know, I know a lot of poets who are political activists, but very few who have held elected office. We've had the New Mexico state Senator Bill O'Neill read for us. He's an example, but not too many others, although in other countries, it's quite common for statesmen, political figures to write poetry. But in America, there's that great divide between poets and everyone else. So, so how did you, I guess, how do you wear those two different hats or deal with the misconceptions? Maybe you don't have those misconceptions on Western Slope, but they do many places. Yeah.
No. So for me, you know, I've always been a speaker, a talker, a singer, a chatter. I've always used my voice to express myself, and the power of language impressed me very early on. I got to study Latin. Forsanid haec olim meminisse vabit, you know, and I got to study Middle English. Wander opera with the shudder sota, the raft of March hath pierced to the road. So I began by loving language, and then as I got older and as I got wiser, I learned about the social justice issues in this country, and you know, I could have turned into SDS kind of person. There was an SDS guy who was killed at that prison riot at Attica. He wrote to his son when he was 2 years old, "You have to try and learn to be uncomfortable." And that was one of the wisest things I remember hearing about, because in this culture, it's so easy to take people and make them comfortable, and then they no longer really see the inequities of the world they live in. You know, we're all embedded in capitalism. I'm a bad capitalist, but I'm embedded in it, like all of us. Like all of us, we poison the atmosphere to get around. That's our mobility. It's going to be the kind of thing people are going to look back on like they look back on slavery and say, "You poisoned the earth to get around? That's what you did?" But, you know, I found myself involved in both worlds. There was a conference in San Francisco back in Noe Valley back in the early 80s. And it was a left-right conference, WRITE. And half the room was personal liberationists. There were people who said, well, actually, half was Marxist Leninists. And they were saying, it's class. You know, we need the elite to get the masses to do what we want them to. And then the other half of the room was personal liberation people, gays and lesbians, saying, what the fuck? I mean, if you're not going to treat us decent, we don't care what you think about class and masses. Treat us right first. Well, give us the respect we deserve. And then there were a few of us in the very back of the room who were saying, you know, where does the earth fit into all of this? I don't get it. So I was lucky when I came to Colorado. I I got it. I became a student of Dolores LaChapelle. Her book, Sacred Land, Sacred Sex, Rapture of the Deep, was an incredible teaching manual for me of how to live my life, critique of Western civilization, and then positive ideas about how to move forward, mainly with the arts, but with a couple of different things. And one of them was bardic poetry, speaking your mind, which is something I do. And then I realized that as a newspaper editor, as a poet, politics was the next step. If I really wanted to make change, it was one thing to be the poetry editor for Earth First and yell and scream and get nothing done, or which was important. I mean, we needed to move the needle over to what the real radical was. When Earth First started, Sierra Club was radical. They weren't after Earth First finished with them. But then I realized to get real change done, we got to work what I call the radical middle. So I really worked in the radical middle, which is a hard place. Both all your friends start to find issue with you for various reasons. So, which as a poet, I think we all appreciate that. Everybody hates what we do. I mean, they love it, they hate it, whatever. They're all different. They don't do it like we do it. We all do it our own way, which is what's lovely about the single pure voice. I mean, my major teacher in the seminary, we only had one art teacher. That was only for a week. Was Sister Carita Kent. She has pieces in the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. Wonderful graphic artist. She said the poets of our day are filmmaking. Come on, that's the poems today. But you know what? To do a film, you got to almost sell your soul in terms of get the financing, unless you're rich. So, as a poet, you don't need anybody. All you need is yourself. And so, in politics, you need everybody. I had to spend a lot of time listening, and in poetry, I do a lot of time talking. So I managed to make the two work for me, John. And there are people throughout history. Neruda was one. There are many people throughout history who were political as well. And the creative impulse to write, I think, is something that we should all share. I think it's a skill all of us can do. It's not something special to a certain breed of people who drink themselves silly or drive across the country in crazy coupes. No, it's really about the process of discovering a way to manifest your inner self, what you see around you, the observations of life.
Mm-hmm. And following up, the other side of that coin, or whatever, is that close observation of the natural world, which you continue to do in your poetry and presumably in your life, and both the mushroom and every other aspect of your place. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's wonderful to be alive again. I mean, I was very close to passing. I went through this incredible transformative, I thought it was going to be an odyssey. It was really more like an ordeal. Chemo and radiation is really devastating, but I watched my wife use alternatives and lose and leave us. And so I used alternatives. I've been taking mushrooms ever since for the last 20 years as immune builders. But I went the Western route with good doctors, and I had a wonderful family physician who prepared me for what was going to happen, caught things early, and took me. She was my doula. She took me to the right doctors, the oncologists, the otolaryngologists, the urologists, the people in the region who were really good. And they're not all good. I went to one that she didn't recommend, and I was sorry. So after all of that, I feel so alive now. It's wonderful to be with you all again.
Well, it's so good to hear, Art, that you're back. You're looking great. So, and it's great to hear that some of these festivals are still going on, like the you mentioned the Crestone, Colorado. Can you talk a little bit more?
They've had great. They brought people from all over New Mexico and the Western Slope, and also some of the Front Range. It's been a wonderful gathering of poets, not in the cities where all the money goes for the arts, but no, in the rural areas where people care really deeply about the arts and usually don't lean on the government for support. Instead, they figure out a way to make it work local, and then we don't have any ties to us. We do whatever the fuck we want. So that part I love a lot about the diversification and the decentralization of the poetic community, particularly in Colorado. I know in New Mexico, is even a bigger hotbed. You have Santa Fe, Taos, all these nodes besides Placitas and things.
Silver City, and
right. There's all these things up and down the state. So and you have a rich heritage of 3 different or 15, 20 different cultures, a deep heritage that hasn't been chased off the land. You know, one of the things I was proudest of as a county commissioner was getting my county to make a formal apology to the Northern Utes, the Uncompahgre band of the Ute people, the Nuche, that were physically removed from the area where I live. And we made that apology. We went over and presented it, was accepted, and now we have exchange programs for all 3 of the Ute tribes in our area. So I'm proud of that, because I think it's really important for us, as Donna Haraway would say, we need to stay with the troubles. Staying with the trouble is something that, as an ecofeminist scholar, I think she's rightly pointed out, it's very important that we don't forget. I don't think we have to dwell on it always. We certainly weren't the ones involved directly. We inherited all of this. So our stance here, our activity, should be an awareness and understanding, keeping in mind, respecting and honoring for now, and moving on. And I think that's a really wonderful way for all of us to move forward, whether in the political or the poetry world.
Thank you. I would like to open things up. If anyone has a question, should they put them in the chat, Jules, or how?
Yeah, I've been typing in the chat. That,
okay. Any questions from the chat?
But I like how you say that, Art. Stay with the troubles.
Yeah.
Because I've always thought poetry is political anyways, political in the sense that not necessarily all politics, but it's what that to write it, you pretty much have to be involved in society and or that debate where some people say poetry shouldn't be political. I think it should be, but so thanks for talking about that. What I'm just reading a question here. Oh, Mary Oishi asks, what exactly made you decide to leave the priesthood?
Oh, that's a complex question, but the quick answer is my brother died. I had a moment of not understanding. I was 16, he was 15, and he had a strep throat, went into his kidneys, and he got nephritis and spent 9 months dying. And so it was before the kidney machines. So I had a moment of suddenly, what was I doing? Being a carrier of a tradition that had this all-powerful figure who let my brother die. It was like, what? It was cognitive dissonance. And then when I went to the major seminary, I remember reading a book called Existential Phenomenology, and I really changed my way of thinking. It wasn't about objective reality. It wasn't about good, bad, God is, God isn't. It wasn't that binary duality that Aquinas and Socrates, everybody kind of plays back to. No, it was much more the flux, Panta Rei. Everything is in flux. Everything is changing. Everything is quantum. Everything is entangled. There's all these different modalities that were out there that made me think it was all about relationships. And when I reached Dolores talks endlessly about how our society is one of objects. We're a society, a language of nouns. Whereas if you go with indigenous people, they're a language of verbs. They're about process. You know, we say the word perfect. You know what perfect means? It's from the Latin facere, which means to make, and pair, through. So it's the making through of something. It isn't the flawlessness, which is what we've connotatively interpreted now. But really, its root is all about the making. And poetry it's the making of poetry that's important to me. It's the making of relationships in politics that's important to me. So I think it was when I realized that it was the relationship with me and the universe, me and God, or whatever we want to call it, the great mystery, whatever it is, it was understanding that individuality, what Lynn Margulis talks about, the myesis of absorbing into yourself something that was completely outside yourself and becoming a new being.
I had to mention Bill Nevins says in the chat, you would have been a good priest, Art. and it's grand. You did not waste your gift on the damn church.
Well,
And I
God, boy, I
second
hear you there,
Bill.
Bill. I mean, God, but if Ireland just legalizes abortion and we go against it, thanks to our Catholics. Oh my God. Yeah, the Archbishop of San Francisco, Salvatore Cordileone, was appointed by the discredited Benedict, who is a saint, I guess, or I don't know. He really shouldn't be. He was really partly responsible for the current problem scandal in the church. There were some homeless people sleeping in one of the churches in San Francisco on the steps, so he used water hoses to get rid of them. That's the Catholics for you.
But the money lenders were fine.
I have a grudge on my shoulder. I don't mean to offend anyone. The Catholic, Thomas Merton I'm a big fan of Thomas Merton. Gerard Manley Hopkins was the one who took me to poetry to begin with. So there are many good things about the church and the spirituality of the church. The power games and the hierarchy and the clergyism, the clericalism, no, there's a lot of problems there.
Okay, we have another chat question from Jackie Slagle. You can probably read this in the chat, Art, but how does it feel as a psychedelic ethnogenic pioneer to witness the starts of legality? And do you think we're indeed on the cusp of FDA approval of?
Yeah, well, it's we call ourselves psychonauts. We've been, and of course, these days they're putting the use of entheogens of various kinds. Entheogen is our word, which means what takes you to God or what reveals the God within. Those are a different category of drugs for some of us. They're different than cocaine and some of the refined things. LSD and mushrooms and ayahuasca, we think of them as entheogens, things that take you to a deeper plane, different self. Like Michael Pollan says, shatters your ego and you got to build it back up yourself. One of the things we didn't do in the 60s was integration. We did it, but we did it ourselves. And not everybody did so well. Some people didn't reintegrate very well and we lost them. So it wasn't without casualties. We took these substances without we may have had even a proper setting, but we didn't have a tradition. We certainly didn't have the guides, and we didn't have the reintegration that's so integral to a therapeutic use of entheogens, which is what they're teaching now with psychedelic therapy. And we did it ourselves, but not everybody, like I say, did it, and some didn't do it well. I was lucky that, to me, I was able to bring that whole energy of what I was, what got shattered, my ego structure as a carrier of a 2,000-year-old tradition, and then to rebuild what I really was, which was a creator maker, a person who makes things. And so as a poet, and as a person of community, a community builder, an activist, whether it was anti-nuclear, whether it was for housing, transportation, for apologies, whatever it was, I was able to bring that energy. And I really love what my friend Bob Grossman. Bob, so happy I see your hand up, and I see what you wrote here in the chat. Bob lives with me in Norwood. He's an amazing fluid dynamic scientist who understands weather systems better than anyone I've ever met. And we have a whole thing on evaporation. You should talk to him sometime. But what he's talking about emergence is really important, I think. Our teacher on the Western Slope, Jack Mueller, who was a legend in North Beach, moved out here as a good friend and became really a local leader for a bunch of us. His dictum was obey emerging form. So rather than structuring things and fitting them into a Western tradition sonnet or Eastern tradition, gazelle or guzzle or whatever it is, rather than fitting it into something, letting the words come out and find their own way of forming. A really interesting and I think very creative way of dealing with poetry. And then some of us, of course, being Americans, West Coast Americans, we think of the breath line of Olson. We think of the performance energy of Ginsberg and Snyder, and you know, a lot of the West Coast people. So for us, poetry has a big meaning in our culture for us. But bottom line, it's all just storytelling. And you know what? I love hearing stories. So when I go to these Zooms, I love hearing everybody's piece. It's a tradition that a fella, a real kind of a poet, a saint named Kush from back east, started in San Francisco with his Cloud House. He'd have this reading series where it would be open to people walking in off the street, telling their heart song. And there'd be people just doing that. And their heart songs were beautiful. And then sometimes it would be famous poets. Bob Kaufman came, you know, Robert Kelly, and they would be amazing, amazing language artists. And that was really good too.
I see Bob has his hand up. Did you want to say something, Bob Grossman?
I wanted to ask Art a question.
ahead.
You talked about all these books that you've read that have changed your appreciation of things, and teachers like Dolores, whose husband was a very well-known professor at the University of Washington, an atmospheric scientist, and she was right shoulder to shoulder with him, one of the first people to study, really study avalanche. And now they used to ski avalanches. But my question is, Art, you have this broad and deep appreciation of everything around you. You're a walking expression of the Tao. Did you have an epiphanal experience that, not drug-induced, but just something that happened to you, maybe as a young man or recently, that just opened everything just on your own, just like the great poets and Sufis, sadhus, the various people that have opened our minds to the inner life of life?
Well, Bob, it would be hard to choose one. There have been many, many epiphanies. Epiphanos, looking through the window. You know, I've looked through the window of reality and seen many, many, many times. Let me tell you one little story. Early on, right after I left the seminary, I was no longer deferred from the draft, so I took a year as a Vista volunteer. It wasn't called AmeriCorps in those days. It was Vista, Volunteers in Service to America. So I took a job on a Indian reservation, as it worked out, in Montana, and I worked in the preschool. I ran a little youth center. But one day, and I had a car. We got a set salary. I forget, $800, which was a lot of money in those days, for just, you know, being a social worker without really a boss, because the tribal people really didn't know what to do with us. It was a government program, so of course they got it, but they didn't really know how to use it, and they didn't really have a set target. And on top of it, the cohort before me on the same reservation, one of the women vistas had fallen in love with the tribal secretary and broken up his marriage, and half the reservation hated me before I got there. It was a mess. But I drove into Denver because to Billings, which was the main town, and it was where a lot of people went. There were all these people, Indian, Crow Nation people, Apsaraka. They were waiting and they were hitching home, so I would pick up as many as I could fit into my little car. And I remember getting all the way back to Crow Agency where I was staying, and I turned around, and in the back seat there was one more person still sitting there, and I'm like, didn't you want to get off like a mile and a half back? He said, yeah. That's like, and I took him back, and then I thought, my epiphany was, I live in a different world than this man. If I have a feeling, a desire, if I want to do something, and the world tries to stop me, I intervene. I try to make it right. I try to fix it. And no, he put his intention out in the world, and then he waited for the world to come to him. Oh my goodness, that has been such a teaching all my life. I've learned from that teaching, that epiphany, Bob.
Well, that's a great way to end this conversation.
Well, okay, I've got
Oh,
there's
we're
two
not.
more
I brought.
quick questions here that
Okay.
that we'll wrap
But
up.
we have to.
Yeah.
We have to have short answers because
Yep.
we've got. a
So,
lot.
and they kind of go together. Here, I'm gonna,
Okay. Why don't you read them both and then.
so, I'll read the first one from Dennis Fermento. So, basically
yes, Dennis.
lying and manipulation are endemic in politics. And how do you deal with politicians who go back on their word, lie outright, or manipulate their office holders to their own supporters, which you're talking about a little. And is your town small enough that you can avoid that? And then I'll also read Holly's Wilson's question that she said she saw you on PBS about the town of Telluride rallied together to save their open space.
Right. So honestly, what you find out if you listen, and it's really mostly politics is about listening. I mean, I know you have to be now a performer, you have to be on stage, you have to be able to be a step ahead of everything that's happening. If you're not really informed and prepped, you're going to be in trouble. I had to be aware 24 hours a day. I never knew when someone was going to hit me with a question in the post office, in the market, whatever. And the people that I work with, I didn't find them lying. What I found them doing is representing their interests, the interests of the people they work for. I of course, was opposed to more oil and gas on our public lands. And then I go up to Rio Blanco and I talk to the commissioner where 60% of their budget, their county budget, comes from oil and gas. And I realized, oh, okay, I'm against it, but I can see why he's not against it because he's got to have to lay off half the courthouse. I was no way I was going to lay off half my courthouse. So a lot of it was listening deeply. And like now I try to find the inner Trump in myself. I think these reflections, these archetypes we're seeing in the news are really reflections of ourselves. We need to absorb those, look at them in the mirror, figure out where it is we're different, why we're different, and where it is we can find a middle ground with whoever we're talking to, which is what I call the radical middle. And yeah, we were lucky in Telluride. It's an elite enclave. You know, one time I was at a conference down in New Mexico in Alamosa, and I had a great time with this Hispanic Chicano activist, and he said, "Well, Art, where are you from?" And I said, Telluride." I mean, I was really embarrassed. I live in this rich enclave. I'm poor. I couldn't afford Telluride when I moved there. I had to move 40 miles away. But I come from this very rich enclave. He said, "Art, don't ever be ashamed of where you come from. You have a platform that other people don't." Man, I really, really, really relish those words because as a commissioner for 20 years, I worked on the state level, the regional level, even on the national level with the National Association of Counties. I worked and was able to leverage the authority that came with coming from a rich enclave. So we were able, and it's a great story. If you haven't seen the Forever Wild film, I really highly recommend it. It really is a great story. Community decided we were not going to grow any bigger. We're not going to cave into the nuclear armament arms manufacturers who wanted to turn the Floor Valley entrance to the town into a Vail Disneyland kind of energy. They instead condemned and then bought and then had to pay twice what was really, assessed at worth because of hostile courts, and ended up raising $25 million in 3 months and buying the valley floor that leads to Telluride. And now it's a place where the elk live, where the geese live, and where we pass every day before we go into town. So it's a great story.
Thank you, Art. I'll say your blog.
Yeah.
Which I put in the chat, but it's goodtimespoet.blogspot.com. So if you want to keep in touch that way.
Could we
Anything
unmute
else?
and give Art a round of applause?
Thank you. You've been a great audience. Thank you.
And we could listen to you literally all night long. Yeah, so let's definitely plan some turn engagement. Hopefully, maybe a blended in-person and Zoom thing. Okay, thanks everybody. I also see, I want to say hi to Cooper Gallegos, our former Placitas neighbor, now in Oregon. Hi, always good to see you.